Okay, good morning. We're going to get started here. It seems like everybody is pretty well settled with their coffee. I'm Harold Erickson. Ann Tranvick and I are the cheerleaders for these adult ed talks, and thank you for attending this. We're sort of in competition with another event going on, so it's we're glad if you stay here. That's nice. Professor Ralph Jacobson is a professor of Old Testament and is the Alvin Rogness Chair of Scripture, Theology, and Ministry at Luther Seminary in St. Paul. He spoke to us last year, was it, via Zoom, and talked about Jeremiah 29, seeking the welfare of the city. It was a very fine talk about being a blessing where you are, and it was very poignant about relating to how immigrants and migrants coming in should be welcomed, and how everyone can contribute here and now to the kingdom. I think is the message I got from that. So
close enough.
Okay, I got a B plus. So he'll be talking to us about the Ten Commandments, not just for children anymore. And I think as we get to be adults, we call them the 10 suggestions, and that's sort of my view of how they're treated these days. Well, we're looking forward to hearing about that. Just a comment about upcoming forums on April 3rd. April 3rd. Professor Alan Padgett, also at Luther Seminary, will be talking about the end and the beginning, science and scripture, and be talking about the creation from the viewpoint of science and from the viewpoint of scripture, and also about the end times. So that'll be, I think, a very interesting comparison. And also Peter Ritchie will be speaking in May 1st. We'll talk about Robbinsdale history again, looking at the beginnings of Robbinsdale and then looking at where we're going from here. So that'll be an interesting talk. Having said that, I will turn it over to Professor Jacobson.
Thank you.
Well, good morning.
All right, I think if I put that there and just try not to move too much. You can hear pretty well? Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about the 10 Commandments this morning. How many of you were taught the 10 Commandments as a teenager, maybe in confirmation? Remember, right? How many of you haven't really studied the 10 Commandments, other than maybe teaching your kids the 10 Commandments, since? One of the interesting things about the Lutheran Church is we tend to teach the 10 Commandments to kids, because Luther put them as the first thing in the small catechism. And then we kind of don't teach the 10 Commandments again. But the 10 Commandments are, if you think about them, the 10 Commandments are commandments for adults. Just think about the commandments. You shall not commit adultery, and you shall not murder, right? These are commandments for adults. So I invite people to study the commandments deeply as adults. And when I was doing my PhD, I got to be the teaching assistant for a class on the 10 Commandments, an entire semester on the 10 Commandments twice. And so we only got an hour, but we're going to approach the 10 Commandments as adults for a little while. So the first thing I want you to know about the 10 Commandments is, as a friend of mine says, 19 comes before 20. That is, the 10 Commandments are given in Exodus 20, but Exodus 19 forms the context of them in the Bible. And here's what it says. I need to use this one. There we go. Is it thinking? There we go. So all Israel camped there in front of the mountain. So this is Mount Sinai. They have just gone through the Exodus and been saved from slavery in Egypt. And then the Lord called to Moses, saying, "Thus you shall say to all the Israelites, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. The whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. So God first saves the people and says, you are my treasured possession, a priestly nation. That's the gospel. God has saved us. Then comes the law. These are not conditions to earn God's love, but they're rather, as my teacher said, the 10 Commandments are a picture of what free people look like. You have all been freed. Like the Israelites from bondage in Egypt, you have all been freed in baptism by the grace of Jesus Christ. How do free people live? You shall not kill, you shall not steal, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not hurt your neighbor with your words. Do you get the sense? This is a picture of freedom. Now, when I was at Augsburg College teaching there with Mark Tranvik many years ago now, my first semester I was talking about this and saying the 10 Commandments are how free people live. And one of the students raised his hand and said, that's 1 point for you, Professor. I didn't realize I was the one being graded. And I didn't realize I hadn't made any points that entire semester until that moment. Well, it turned out this kid had been caught with enough cocaine that he could have been thrown away for a long time. And the judge said to him, I'm going to give you a chance. And so he came then to Hazelden Treatment Center, and he came to Augsburg. He was one of the step-up kids there that go through the 12 steps and live together. And he said, I know what it is not to be free and to be freed. And that's what freedom is now. I got to follow the law or I will go back. So that's a little context. All right, so one of the interesting things about the 10 Commandments is there are at least 3 major ways of numbering. The Bible calls them the 10 words in Hebrew, translated as, the Jews call them just the 10 words. Christians tend to call them the 10 Commandments. And I want you just to see the different way of numbering them. So here is the Lutheran and Catholic way. This was the way the 10 Commandments were numbered before the Reformation, and Luther didn't change it. So you can consider this the Western Christian way of numbering them before the Reformation. The introduction, the 19 comes before 20, is, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Notice for us, that is the preamble or the preface to the 10 Commandments. Then, first commandment, you shall have no other gods. In Exodus 20, it goes on and it says, and you shall not make a graven image or an idol that you shall worship. And in context, that graven image is you shall not make a graven image of God or of any other spiritual being. Then it goes on. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord. Remember the Sabbath. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder, commit adultery, steal, bear false witness, or covet your neighbor's stuff. But because of the way we have numbered them so far, we only have 9. So we have 2 coveting commandments, which makes no sense. I'll come back to that. Well then, the Jews have the same words, but they number them differently. So there's a healthy Jewish population in this part of the city, right? You probably have Jewish colleagues and neighbors. And if you ask them about the 10 words, they would say the first word is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Notice it's not a commandment, right? That's why they call them the 10 words. The first word is relationship. I like that. Second word, you shall have no other gods. And like Lutherans and Catholics, part of that second word is also you shall not make an idol. And then they go on through them, and they only have one coveting commandment because they've counted, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. They've counted that as the first word, so they only, both coveting sentences, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, and you shall not covet your neighbor's spouse. They're one word. And then there's the Protestant. So if you ever talk to a Presbyterian or a Congregationalist or a Baptist, this is how they number the Ten Commandments, and this is probably the right way. First of all, context, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the house of land of Egypt. Notice, that's not a commandment, it's context. First commandment, you shall have no other gods. Second commandment, you shall not make for yourself an idol or a graven image and worship it. So notice that's the difference. In the Jewish and Lutheran way of numbering them, you shall not make a graven image is part of the first commandment, or the second word. But for evangelicals and Baptists and Presbyterians, it's a separate commandment. And then you go through them, and you only need one coveting commandment because you've got to 10. Okay, does that make sense? So this has a profound difference on our spiritual common sense. If you grow up a Lutheran or a Catholic in North America or Europe, you will have grown up most likely with stained glass windows and art in your church and in your home, right? If I go upstairs, is there stained glass windows? What are they? By the way, what's the logic of them?
It's the story of Christ. If you follow the side windows.
Yeah. So usually there's a logic. In the church I served, it was the seasons of the church year. Starts with Advent, ends with Christ the King. Sometimes it's the Bible story like Jesus or the whole Bible story. Sometimes it's the 12 disciples. Or you get the idea. But you probably then grew up with art, Christian art, at home too, right? Does that sound familiar? I have in my house lots of Christian art. I've got the story of Jesus framed. I've got the crucifixion. If you grew up Presbyterian, most likely your church has no art in it. Visual art. Probably it's just white walls with gold paint, and then scripture written in words, not pictures. Right? Have you been to a Presbyterian church? Good, don't go. Don't try that. Just kidding. So I went to a Presbyterian seminary for my graduate PhD, and both the chapel on campus and the big Presbyterian church downtown, called Nassau Presbyterian in Princeton, right? Just words on the walls.
Well, if you go to Westminster,
right,
they've got it all over in the halls.
Right, Westminster Presbyterian, right? This big, wealthy church downtown, Minneapolis. The stained glass windows they have there are all abstract. It's color without pictures, right? I mean, same with, it's clear, Central Lutheran's that way too, but one of the things is, what difference does it make if you have in your 10 Commandments a commandment, you shall not worship a graven image? All right. So, let's talk about the purpose of the 10 Commandments. The purpose of the 10 Commandments, in addition to being a picture of freedom, is they teach us how to love the neighbor. Paul says this in Galatians. You were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, right? This is freedom. What does freedom look like? Not self-indulgence. That's what Americans think freedom is, right? Americans think freedom is I can do whatever I want. No, says Paul. Through love become slaves to one another. The whole law is summed up in the single commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So if you boil down all the commandments in the Bible, and I think in the Jewish counting, There's 613 different laws in the Pentateuch, the Torah. If you boil them all down to two, they're love the Lord. I heard this from the preacher as I was coming in. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and might, and love your neighbor as yourself. Harold said, you want to go into church? I said, no, I got it all. I didn't tell you, but I was thinking, I already got it all. I just heard it. That's all you need from the sermon today, right? Okay. That's all I heard. And I thought that's enough. Love the Lord and love your neighbor. But how do you love the neighbor? So I think about it like this, right? We are all born imperfect masterpieces, right? Our human bodies are absolute masterpieces. But we're imperfect. We die, and we hurt each other. We sin against one another. So this condition we're born in is sin. What are you going to do about it? God says, all right, as long as you're here, before you reach eternal life, love each other. Okay, can you do that? And then we kind of say, sure, I can do that. How do I do that? How do I love my neighbor as myself? Then God says, okay, let me help you. Don't steal, don't kill, don't commit murder, don't hurt your neighbor with your words, don't covet your neighbor's stuff, take care of the elderly, and don't use my name wrong. Okay? All right, got it. Okay, hold on. I understand I can't steal my neighbor's stuff, but what if, like, I don't know. And then we get laws like this. All right, you all agree, you shall not steal. That's a good commandment God gives us. I know I can't go into my neighbor. So in the Old Testament, when you read the Torah, the Pentateuch, most of the interesting laws are about oxes and donkeys. And you probably read this and thought, oxes and donkeys? I don't have any of those, right? Anybody here own an ox? How about this, though? Anybody in here own a pickup or a car?
Oh, cars, yeah.
Yeah.
We got cars.
So the ox and the donkey were the pickup and the car of the ancient world. The ox and the donkey were your most valuable possession other than the land. You needed the ox and the donkey to do agriculture, which was the business of the land. So I know I can't steal my neighbor's ox, I get that. But then it says, if someone leaves a pit open or digs a pit and does not cover it or put orange tape around it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, is that stealing? Or how about this? What if my ox and my neighbor's ox get into a fight, because oxes will do that, and my ox kills his ox? Am I guilty of stealing then? That's a good question, says God, and here's the answer. If someone's ox hurts another's ox so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox, split the money, and split the money, split the dead ox. Because you can use the horns and the meat and the leather, right? So that's fair. My ox and your ox get in a fight, we're going to split everything. Sell it, cut it in half, split it, right? Unless, if it was known that the ox was accustomed to gore in the past. In Hebrew, it literally says, if the ox was known to be a gorer. In other words, if everybody knew that was a dangerous ox. My son, when he was little, and I'm talking like 2nd or 3rd grade, he's now a senior in high school, he said once about a dog he had to go by as he walked to school. A neighbor's dog who was a pit bull. Gunnar said, everybody knows that's a bad dog. You don't make eye contact with that dog. The kids know these things, right? If the ox was known to be dangerous, and if its owner had been warned, and he has not restrained it, then the owner of the dangerous ox is guilty of theft. You follow? So it goes like this. All right, love your neighbor. How do I do that? Don't kill, don't steal, don't commit adultery, and so on. All right, but what if, right? You remember when Bill Clinton said, it depends on what the meaning of is, right? Remember that? So, I find the case law, the absolute law is you shall not steal, meaning you shall never, ever in your life steal or kill. That's absolute. In the Bible, those commandments never change. The 10 Commandments are absolute law. But then there's case law, which is not you shall not, but you shouldn't. Or you, in this case, for this long. When I was little, I lived at 800 Sherman Street, Jackson, Minnesota. It was the parsonage where my dad was pastor. And my mom had a rule, you can't cross Sherman Street. It was busy. She didn't mean for my whole life. She meant like maybe until you're 10. And I wasn't allowed to cross Sherman Street. That's case law. So what the case law does is helps us learn to live out the absolute law. It teaches us, because here's the thing. The case law changes as society evolves, develops, new technology is made. I think Moses would never, if somebody had said, all right, I know I can't steal my neighbor's donkey, but what if I steal his identity and use his credit card to buy my own donkey? Is that theft? Moses would have said, steal someone's identity? But now, as you know, people do that all the time. We've now developed new ways of growing wealth, so that presents new ways of stealing identity, stealing electronically. My bishop, Lowell Erdahl, who died a few months ago, he said, when we were kids, he was my pastor, he said, never steal less than $1 million. It's beneath your dignity. And I think with inflation, we'd probably say like 100 million now, right? I always thought that was helpful information to have. All right. Is this making sense so far? All right, let me check the time. Oh, yeah, we're doing great. Okay. So you get a sense. How do you interpret the law? Well, you look at the case laws. I forgot to say one other thing about this. I want to go back. All right. There are, in the 10 Commandments, there are 8 negative commandments, you shall not, and 2 positive commandments, you shall. The 2 positive commandments are, you shall honor the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and you shall honor your father and mother. All 10 commandments have both negative proscriptions, and positive obligations. Do you guys still say the confession and absolution before the start of the service? I've sinned against my neighbor in thought, word, and deed by what I have done and left undone. That is, I've done things that God says you shall not, and I've failed to do things that God says you shall. So even though there's 8 negative and 2 positive commandments, all of them, every one of the 10 commandments has negative aspects, you shall not, and positive. So one of my favorite laws here, you've already seen the first ox law. If 2 oxes get in a fight, is it theft if one of them kills? And there's 3. Yes, if the ox was known to be dangerous, the owner had been warned, and the owner had not kept the ox, on a leash. And then there's positive. So then it goes on, and it says this law. It says, if you see your neighbor's ox lying under a burden, so right, they've loaded it up, and then it says, or his donkey. If you see your enemy, it says, and it has fallen over, right? It's either stuck somewhere or it's fallen and can't get up. And Do not entertain a mean thought because it's your enemy. You must help the ox or donkey up, it says. So it's positive obligations. So the you shall not steal means not only don't take your neighbor's things, but also don't act in a way that's reckless, that harms your neighbor, stuff. But actually, you must help your neighbor. Preserve, protect, and defend. That's what Luther says in the Small Catechism. You must help your neighbor by preserving, protecting, and defending his property. And here's what this looks like. Positive obligation. Let me give you a couple stories. When we were kids, in Northfield, Minnesota, we lived next door to the Halversons. They had 4 kids. And this was in the days when to get a car window up or down, you rolled it. Remember that? Vaguely? And the Halversons were always leaving their car windows down. And just before it rained, my mom would say, run out and roll up the Halversons' windows. Did your mom ever do this? Do you remember this? Or maybe you just did it. So I would go out there and I'd open the door. Now today there would be an alarm that would go off, and you'd roll up the windows. My mom was helping them preserve and protect and defend their property. Here's 2 other pictures of what it looks like. One from my father-in-law and one from my wife, by definition, his daughter. My father-in-law, who died a few years ago, he lived on a swamp in Moorhead, Minnesota. It's actually a golf course, but they can't fool me. It was a floodplain of the Red River, and they thought, well, let's just put some greens and some sand and we can charge people. But it's a swamp. So living on this, their basements were sump pumps were constantly running, right? Water would come into the sump pump pumps it out. New neighbor moved in across that next house, and they didn't have a discharge. Every house in this development at this time of year has a discharge hose on the discharge pipe, right where the sump pump kicks the water out. Then they have a big hose, goes down to the front sidewalk, and then it puts it out into the street, right? You've seen something like this somewhere? Well, the new kid moves in next door. He's newly married, he's got a new baby, and he's never owned a house before, so my father-in-law goes and explains to him, if you don't put a hose on there, it'll just go right back down, it'll go right into your basement again, and your sump pump will run all the time. So you have to go to Menards, and you have to buy a hose, and you have to buy a hose clamp. Well, new kid, he's never owned a house, he's not getting any sleep because he's got a new baby. My father-in-law tells him this 3 times, and then my father-in-law just went to Menards, and he bought a hose and a hose clamp and did it for him, right? Because that's how you preserve and protect and defend your neighbor's property. Now here's how my wife has done it. We live on a corner in St. Paul, and my wife, I'm in a wheelchair, so she does the snow blowing. What she would do is, we live on the corner, on one side is our driveway. She would snow blow our driveway, and then the neighbors next to it, because they only have a little driveway, so they can't justify buying a snow blower, but there's still a lot of snow. And then she would go out to our front, do the front walk, and do the neighbor to the north, right? Well, when does it end? When have you done enough? Why doesn't she do the whole hill? Well, that's not the question. It's not when have you done enough. You're already free. It's have you helped your neighbor. It's not about earning God's points. It's just about loving your neighbor. And if we all do a little bit, rolling up the neighbor's windows, putting a hose on their discharge pipe, helping them with their lawn and their sidewalk, right? That's what a free society looks like. I read something this past week. I think it was in the Star Tribune. Did any of you guys see the article in the Star Tribune about what was called scufflaws and shoveling their sidewalk? Did you read that article? I didn't know what a scufflaw was. I had to look that up. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. But people who don't get their walk shoveled within 24 hours, which is usually us now, because my wife hurt her back, and my son is less than helpful most of the time, because he's 17. One person in St. Paul was getting mad about it and getting mad at her neighbors. So instead, she started a Facebook group of people who just want to volunteer to help people who can't shovel their own walks, senior citizens or handicapped people, right? And she said, I used to be mad, now I started this group, and I feel good, right? So she turned something that was making her angry into something that helps her neighbor and doesn't make her mad. I just think that's genius. Because, like, when I watch the news, it makes me mad, because that's what it's designed to do, right? The news that you watch, if you watch on cable TV, is designed to make you angry so that you'll stay angry enough to vote. The other thing is to read the biblical stories that show us how these laws work, to think about what they mean. So here, I want to talk about this biblical story with you. So you've already seen this commandment, and I want to think about it, because we don't, as Lutherans, we don't talk about that you shall not make a graven image. So here's a great story. It's the story. So Moses is up there on the mountain about 40 days, it says, downloading the law that God's giving. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron, that's his brother, his older brother, who's the priest, and said to him, come, make gods for us who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. Now, first thing I want to tell you is this phrase, come make gods for us who shall go before us, could be translated one of two ways. Come make gods for us, or come make a god for us. Meaning an image of God. Because you know the story. How many golden calves did they make? Do you remember? One. So this should be translated, come make a god for us. Because they don't make multiple gods. And if you read in the Jewish translation, called the Tanakh, that's how they translate it. Come make a god for us who will go before us. Now, as for this, let me finish the paragraph. Aaron said, okay, take off the gold rings that are in the ears of your sons, your wives, and your daughters, and bring them to me. I like the fact that in the Bible it says the sons are wearing earrings, just in case your parents ever got mad at the boys in your family for wearing earrings. So all the people took off the gold from their ears, and they brought it to Aaron, and he took the gold, and he formed it in a mold, and cast an image of a calf, and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Again, so this should be translated. He makes one calf, and he says, it should be translated, I believe, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Now notice that phrase, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, has happened twice. And notice in the Ten Commandments, it's in the Jewish counting in the first word. I am the Lord your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. So is it true that Moses brought them up out of the land of Egypt? Or is it true that this calf, who is an image of Yahweh, not an image of a false god, is it true that either Moses or the calf brought them up out of the land of Egypt? True or false? False. Mostly false, right? God used Moses, and God, yes, but God is not the calf, and the calf is not a proper image of God. So in this image, in this story, the people are following two false images of the true God. The first false image of the true God is the human leader who worked for God. And the second false image of the true God is the calf, who does not represent God. I want you to invite you to think about your own way, maybe that you worship God the wrong way. Have you ever longed, this is a dangerous question to ask. So, who is the human leader who you miss and wish were still here in the church? I'll tell you two from my life. One is, I sure miss our old president at the seminary. You're not going to put this on the web, are you? It's okay if you do. I miss the old president, David Teedy, who hired me. And I miss Bishop Erdahl, because he is my image of what a bishop should be. And none of the other human leaders I've known can live up to Bishop Erdahl. And I am guilty of longing for those old days, rather than following the leader that God has given me now. Moses is not there. They miss him. Well, and what about the facilities? Let the calf represent the church building, the artwork. Maybe it's not even this building for you, it's some other church building that you left. My brother served two churches in a town in Minnesota, one in the town, one in the country, but there were two ELC Lutheran churches in the town, and they had split. There had been one ELC church in this town, and they split over building an education wing. So people wanted to build an education wing. Half the church said yes, half the church said no, so they didn't build it. So that half of the church that said yes left and started their own church with an education wing. And then at the other church, which my brother served later, they said, oh, well, we better build an education wing too. After, right? It's just humans, right? It's how we are. So this story is inviting us to think about, how am I like these people? How have I made an idol out of the human leaders that I miss, or out of the building? I learned in seminary, never change the color of the carpet in the sanctuary. Because you can add a fourth person to the Trinity easier than change the color of the carpet. The story goes on. They rose up the next day to revel, it says. The people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. Oh, by the way, look at how this ends. Aaron says, tomorrow shall be a festival to the Lord, Yahweh. So obviously, tomorrow will be a festival not to a false god. Tomorrow will be a festival to the true God. But they're worshiping the God. They're worshiping the true God the wrong way. They're doing it by having the image of God. They're doing it by idolizing the human leader who they miss. And the people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to revel. And the word revel has sexual connotations here. So we can imagine that this is a debauched, sounds like fun, right? A big party to eat and drink, and maybe there's a certain amount of sex going on. Don't blame me, it's in the Bible. This is why we're studying this as adults, by the way, right? Then the Lord, we're going to change scenes. Now we're going up to the mountain. Then the Lord says to Moses, go down at once. Your people, and notice here's that phrase, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, they've acted perversely. They've been quick to turn aside from the way I commanded them. They've cast for themselves an image of a calf, and they have said, and they've worshipped and sacrificed to it, and they've said, this is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. We've had that phrase 4 times now, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. I forgot to highlight and read the first one in this paragraph. Your people have acted perversely, so go down. I have seen this people, how stiff-necked they are. Now let me alone so that my wrath may burn hot against them, so I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation. Meaning, I'm going to start over. Just you and me, Moses. You're going to be the new Abraham, and you're going to be a great nation, just like I made Abraham a great nation. And then Moses says, Moses implored the Lord his God, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? 5 times that phrase in the story. And Moses is the only one who gets it right. Even God says, your people, whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt. You ever, my wife and I occasionally will say, your son is doing this. You go talk to him, right? Parents arguing about the kid. Whose kid really is it when my father-in-law used to say when my kids did something, that's the Jacobson. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, and how you swore to them by your own self, saying, I will multiply your descendants, and all this land I will give your descendants. So this is a story. I love this story, because it's a story about how we falsely worship the true God in multiple ways. And then it's a story about prayer. Moses gets in between God and the people and says, you promised. You promised, they're your people, you're stuck with them, you brought them out of Egypt, and you promised to bring them to the land. And God remembered his promise to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and God then changed his mind about the anger that he had. So it's a story then about human sin, it's a story about prayer, and it's a story about God remembering God's promises. So I love this story. Because I'm Lutheran, and we don't really pay attention to the you shall not worship a graven image command, I think it's helpful. So I think one of the worst things, here's what the Christian church did early on. When the early Christians were kicked out of the Jewish synagogues, they had to negotiate with them. Well, how are we going to keep the Old Testament in light of what God has done for us in Jesus? And they said, what about the graven image command? Well, Jesus is the image of God after all. So they said 2 things. 1, images of God the Father will be prohibited. So the first person of the Trinity, the early church decided we will not have graven images of. But because Jesus is God in the flesh, the true image of God, it says in the New Testament, images of Jesus will be allowed. And then, around the time of the Reformation, right, Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel with God the Father portrayed as an old, gray man. And I think that picture that was put in the Sistine Chapel has done a lot of damage in terms of portraying a particular image of God the Father. Images of Jesus the Son should be continued to be allowed, but every culture should portray Jesus as a member of their culture. Jesus was a Jew, a Galilean Jew. We don't know what he looked like. The New Testament never once says anything about his appearance. All we know is he had a robe with the hem or the tassel of the robe, probably the Jewish cloak that had 613 knots, 1 knot on them for each of the laws of the Pentateuch. And when the woman reaches out and touches the tassel on his robe, she's touching one of those. Other than that, we're not told what Jesus looks like, ever. So most likely, I think every culture should portray Jesus as a member of their culture as a theological interpretation of the incarnation, that God comes to us in the flesh in Jesus. So the Chinese artist He Qi portrays Jesus as Chinese, and so on. If I was better at PowerPoint now, I would have an image, right? And of course I don't. Because my teaching philosophy is death by text. All right. So, it's 10:45. If some of you got to run to the next worship, that's great. So how does God's law work? God's law works in our lives in two ways. The first use of the law, have you been taught about the uses of the law ever here? Remember? See, we teach this to pastors, but we should teach it to everybody. Luther should have put this in the catechism. There are two uses of the law. The first use is called the civil use, and it's basically how is God using the law to create a more trustworthy society. So when God says, do not steal, and we both keep the law by not stealing our neighbor's property, but also protecting it, preserving it, and defending it, that creates a more trustworthy society, right? That's the first use of the law. The second way God uses the law is, there's an old joke, right, about there's lots of different ways the joke goes, but I'll tell the really fast version. Ole goes to the bank and for a loan, and the bank president says, sign here, and he says, no, I'm not signing anything. My father told me never to sign anything. And he goes, I can't give you the loan. Ole goes to the next bank, the bank president signs it, he goes, no. My father and the bank president reaches over, grabs his ears, bangs Ole's head on the table and says, sign here. So Ole signs. Then Ole goes back to the first bank and says, the other guy gave me the loan. He goes, well, you signed it, didn't you? He goes, yeah, well, why didn't you sign it? He goes, well, he explained it better. Right? So the second use of the law is God banging our head and saying, hey, you just broke the law. And this second use of is either described either as a hammer, that God uses the law as a hammer or 2x4 in the head, or as a mirror to show us what we really are like. There's a book called God's Hallway of Mirrors, and it's about the Ten Commandments. In the second use, they remind us that we do not perfectly keep the law, and therefore we need to repent, and we need to own the fact that we are sinners so that we can receive the grace of Jesus Christ. And I think that that's my way of understanding it, is that God explains it better sometimes when he reminds us that we are sinners who need the grace of God. All right. Let me talk just briefly about one last commandment, and then I want to just have your questions. Honor your father and mother is the first commandment with a promise. Honor your father and mother so that your days may be long in the land. Well, who are the father and mother of the Israelite household? Israelites lived in a 3-generation house, literally, with grandma and grandpa as the father and mother. And honor your father and mother is not a commandment for little children to obey their middle-aged parents. Remember, the Ten Commandments are for adults. Don't commit adultery. Don't murder. So, in that context, these are commandments for adults who have aging parents. Honor your honor the old people in your society. Take care of them so that your life may be long. In other words, you're going to get old someday, we hope. So really, this is about protecting those who can no longer contribute economically. And it's about protecting the family. I want to say something about each one of those. So my mom died a year and a half ago, and my dad is 91. And so for my 2 sisters and my brother and me, and my mother-in-law, my father-in-law died, my mother-in-law is aging, and my mother-in-law and my father have different aging issues. And honor your father and mother is about how do you take care and protect and value folks once they're getting old. you can just think about that. There's lots of things, right? Second of all, this is about the family. One of the things that I have realized in my life is that God's basic building block of civilization, all of civilization, no matter what civilization it is, the basic building block is the family. Now, families have been structured in many different ways throughout the ages, right? As I was saying, the absolute law, honor father and mother, never changes. But what it looks like in different societies with different technologies and norms and different issues changes. But our society has disregarded the family in the last 80 years. And we know there's not a single outcome for children that's better when families are blown up. Not a single one. And the church needs to hear God's call to think about. Family doesn't have to be 2 parents, 2 kids, and a pet. Family can be different, because family always was different. My great-grandma, who came over here from Surnadal, Norway, her dad died, and so she was moved around as a child from relative to relative, because they were trying to figure out how to take care of family. When she got over here, she and her husband had 11 kids. Because I think maybe part of the reason why you having so many kids, well, I grew up as an only child moving around. You know what I mean? And maybe their reaction to that was they wanted a big family where people could take care of each other. I don't know. But the big value in this commandment, I think, is family and taking care of the aged. All right, I'm going to stop and just take your questions or rebuttals. Rebuttals are welcome too. I often get rebuttals in the form of a question that starts, "Don't you think that?" And I almost never do, actually.
Sir, you just spoke a few minutes ago about we repent to serve grace, but don't we have grace already? And
Yes.
that's why we repent.
Yes. And then it's just,
There's a difference.
but then there is a difference. But then it's cyclical, right? Grace is first, then forgiveness, but we continue to sin, and so it's just where on the wheel are you at exactly this moment. But yeah, 19 comes before 20. Grace is first, then the law, for sure.
I was wondering why they made a golden calf. What does a calf has to do with the Bible? How did they get that in there?
It's fertility. It's an image of fertility. So the calf is the calf is of a cow or an ox, and or a bull, and so it's an image of strength and agricultural fertility. And right, Yahweh is bigger than that, and is not to be pictured like that. Other questions?
I'm curious about the commandment to love your neighbor in the current situation with our war and the war in Ukraine and the Russians. How do we talk about that and what our responsibility as a Christian to understand that commandment?
How do we, yes. I don't know all of the answer first. How do we love the neighbor? I mean, I've been praying for both the Ukrainian people and the Russian people. I wonder if there are Russian immigrants here, are they getting backlash from the culture, in our cancel culture, when they're not doing anything, right? So I think we need to love our Ukrainian and Russian neighbors here and make sure there's not, retaliation or hatred for them. I think we have to very much help, I hope help Ukraine rebuild? One of the problems with big economic sanctions, and I don't know the wisdom here, is it hurts. The goal is we're going to hurt your people so that your people will then demand that you, the leader, change, right? But Putin is one of the richest men in the world, clearly has no conscience. So at what point are sanctions hurting the wrong person? I don't know, but I'm for them now. They work better if everyone is sanctioning them. Why have U.S. sanctions against Cuba not worked to change the regime there? It's because basically it's only the U.S., right? You could always buy Cuban cigars in Germany, right? So Germany didn't have sanctions against Cuba. I think sanctions only work when everybody does them. Right now, all of the West is doing it. I don't know, though. What do you think?
I hope they work, and I think your point about loving the neighbor that's a Russian neighbor in our country is a really tangible way to look at it. I struggle with my hatred of Putin, and how does that change my thinking about loving my neighbor? Is to struggle of those two when it's obviously not the Russian people
Yeah.
or the ones driving tanks in. Anyway, so yeah, I don't know. Thank you.
As an example, I've got neighbors from Belarus,
Yeah.
and Belarus has become a bad actor along with the Russians.
Yep.
And I saw her out in her driveway yesterday. I stopped by intentionally to ask her about her family over there, if she's heard from them, if they're okay. Just to let her know that,
Yeah.
that I care about them as people. And the fact that from Belarus is not a factor. So I think that's the sort of thing we can do to express our support for even the people that are Russian, who are probably just as bad about this as anybody else.
Oh yeah, I mean the corruption of the Russian system. It's why so many people have fled it.
Yeah.
I do think we should be ready to help rebuild the churches. I mean, I think our churches can help Lutheran churches in Ukraine rebuild, and maybe the Baptists will help the Baptist churches rebuild, and so on. Did you hand up?
Oh, I was thinking about, when we help our neighbor, how about refugees?
Yeah.
How about refugees that are white compared to refugees or people of color or practice Islam?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're the richest country in the world. We should be helping some of those refugees come into our country. Opinion?
Well, a few friends of mine and I were asked to help write a Bible study about, 6 or 7 years ago, called My Neighbor is Muslim, published by LSS Minnesota. And my point in the study is God is always giving us new neighbors to love. So we should regard whoever our new neighbor is as a gift from God that we should love. It's easier to love people who are more like us, just because we have more in common. But around us now, many of the new neighbors God in this area has been giving us are Somali Muslims. In the 70s, it was Vietnamese and Cambodian. We've just hired a new teacher at Luther Seminary who is a Cambodian Lutheran to teach New Testament. I took him out to lunch because I'm the dean and I was, hey, welcome to the faculty, right? But just to, part of it is to hear their stories. His story, I don't know how much you guys remember the Khmer Rouge, right? That is Communist Party genocide in Cambodia. His parents fled here from genocide. And then that's his story. I'm here because of genocide. He speaks Khmer, also speaks Norwegian because his one parent married a Norwegian when she got here. So I think part of it is to hear the story and, learn to love the Cambodian and the Vietnamese and the Mexicans and the Cubans and the Somali that are in our neighborhood.
It was interesting to hear a comment from some European talking about seeing the images of these Ukrainian refugees, all these women and these blonde, blue-eyed children, and that actually raised a bit of a stir in the press about the singling out the fact that they're blonde and blue-eyed, as opposed to all the other refugees of color all around the world.
Right. Correct. I agree.
So I just had a question, kind of related to an earlier question on the, love thy neighbor, and with respect to Jesus, turn the other cheek.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what are the different levels of this? Where, okay, that's enough, because we talked about sanctions. Well, I think the purpose of the sanction is to put pressure on the people in Russia to, pretty much overturn the government, which will in turn, there'll be less death in the long run, less murder, less war. Because right now he's committing total war on Ukraine.
Yeah.
There's no differentiation there with the targets he's hitting. So in that sense, yeah, we're doing something that's really tough, but it's in the pursuit of a future peace that can come sooner than what's going to happen if things continue as there are. So there's a lot of issues. So you go back to the commandments, thou shalt not murder. I think in the old days it used to be thou shalt not kill.
Right.
I think that's changed, but it's a kind of a long game we got to look at here with what's going on.
Yeah.
In Ukraine. There's going to be hardship no matter what, but we're going to have to put pressure on them, sanctions or other means, and there's going to be death. And but it's a pursuit of peace in the long run, which I think is it was Augustine or somebody talking about just war doctrine a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a big issue there. But it's in the pursuit of peace that this stuff's going to be done.
I totally agree. I'm for a strong military, the U.S. military, because weakness does invite predation. So yeah, I agree. I will say this about you mentioned murder. So the word actually if the NRSV still says you shall not, no, it says you shall not murder. The word in Hebrew means murder. Every language has many different words for taking another human life, right? We have murder, we have kill, we have abortion, we have capital punishment, we have euthanasia. Just think about because we're trying to say it's not all the same. Not all taking of another human life is the same. Some are, you said, just war, justifiable. One of the things we've always said is, since Augustine, is when a soldier in war kills another soldier from the, enemy, that's not murder. If they kill a citizen intentionally, so I'm actually for translating the word murder. And then the question is, and so this is, right, this is where, is abortion, which is the taking of a human life, scientifically that's not debatable. Is it murder? And I would actually probably say, it's not all one thing. Not all abortions are the same. I believe that abortion for gender selection, the number one reason in the world that people have abortions is that they don't want to have girls. Right? So like you looked, right? Especially in Asian societies and in some Muslim societies. This is, so screening for gender, and then screening for Down syndrome in America, right? And we know that those tests are often false positives. Iceland a few years ago had an article declaring they had cured Down syndrome. And what that meant is they had killed them all before they were born. Now you can decide whether you think, I don't think God blesses screening for gender. Just my personal opinion. So that's, yeah, I like transcendent murder because it does say, okay, when is the taking of another human life regrettable but justifiable? One of the things, are there any World War II vets left in this congregation? They'd probably have to be close to 100. When I was a pastor in St. Paul, I'll stop with this. We're past 11. I didn't realize I was still talking. I started ministry in 1991, which was about the time the World War II generation was retiring. And my neighborhood was all built on the GI Bill. This neighborhood probably was too, right? Did this neighborhood have did this town really grow in the 40s and 50s and 60s? So I bet you in the church that I was pastor of, I bought my house from a World War II vet who had just died in a car accident. My sister was the paramedic on the scene. It was in northern Minnesota. But then I bought his house. I didn't even know it, So we had all those vets in the neighborhood still alive and some dying. And I got to know them. As they were retiring, they could no longer shut out the memories from the war. And so men who had traumatic war memories that they kept back, just probably by working, right? Those memories, and they needed to talk about them then. I got my wife's grandfather and my uncle, who were both in the war, to tell their stories that they had never told before. So even when we say, you did this for the country, you didn't want to go. My wife's grandpa was an ornery, old German from Russia who had polio, and so when they came up with the work programs in the Depression, he applied and they said, no, you had polio, you're not qualified for CCC, right? And then we went to war and they drafted him and he said, no, I had polio. They said, you're just fine. So they put him in the Battle of the Bulge because he spoke German. He was a front observer. And he gets blown in the Battle of the Bulge. He gets blown and gets some frostbite on his feet. Years later, it took 40 years for them to get 50 years for them to give him a second Purple Heart for the frostbite on his feet. He got one Purple Heart, and so he got a second one in retirement. And they said, "What took so long?" The news on the news. This is up in North Dakota. They put him on the news. Why didn't they give you a frostbite? Why didn't they give you that Purple Heart right away? He said, well, I was blown off a half track and then stuck in the snow, and they said, it's your fault you got to have frostbite because you didn't wear warm enough socks. And he said, I looked everywhere in the Ardennes forest for a Woolworths, and I couldn't find one, he said. Anyway, I just wanted to share that funny story about Elmer, he was a great ornery old guy, and I loved him. All right, thanks everybody.
Last call for coffee and muffins. We're both here. Anybody still hungry?
Oh, thank you, Rolf. That was great. Well, we'll see you 2 weeks, I guess. It'll be April 3rd. Bye now.